Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, November 19th. Pepe Escobar is here with us. Welcome back, Pepe.
Wonderful to be here, Nima. And to you and to all of you out there, greetings from about to be destroyed NATO stan.
Let's get started with G20 in Brazil. You didn't have the opportunity to come here to see
No,
it.
I didn't want to go. It's different.
How did you find it right now? How do you see the relationship of these countries within G20? Is it getting somewhere substantial, important, or the importance of G20 is fading away?
Um, it's a good question, Nima, because of the invisible story behind this latest G20, especially, which nobody's gonna talk about it. I can because I'm independent. You know, the this G20 was about to be hijacked by the G7, NATO stan. They wanted to force the Brazilians to follow their agenda, and we all know what is their agenda. It's basically Davos Great Reset, all sorts of nonsense, plus Russophobia, Iranophobia, xenophobia. It's all sorts of phobias, etc. To the, I would say, great merit of President Lula and the Brazilian foreign policy, they didn't allow that to happen. Their emphasis was to have a G20 focused on social issues, on fight against hunger and poverty. So in the end, they did it. So hats off to them. But the pressure was enormous, enormous. The good thing is that, of course, apart from that wonderful photo posing in front of the Museum of Modern Art with the sugar loaf in the back, everybody smiling, sunshine, etc., and that banner over there fighting against hunger and poverty, that's very, very nice. But will they deliver? Don't expect so. Expect it from the BRICS countries inside the G20 and the other global south, global majority countries inside the G20. Don't expect that from the G7. And especially from that absolutely horrid, toxic Medusa, which was, trying to seduce Lula when she arrived in Brazil, almost prostrating in front of Lula's feet. These people will never do anything for the global majority, for hunger around the world, for the downtrodden, etc. Just look at their, I would not say even a reaction, the way they fully support the genocide in Gaza. That's all you need to know. So another angle, when you look at the final declaration of the G20, it's very mild, to say the least, being very diplomatic. Né? Lots of lofty intentions, of course. At least they proclaim themselves to be in favor of a sovereign Palestinian state. That the least they could do, right? But for instance, they don't condemn the genocide in Gaza. Why? Because the whole NATO stan G7 and the G20 supports the genocide in Gaza. So this is extremely, extremely serious. And you see this in details. Can you imagine that the Brazilians had to work hard to forge a consensus on the final statement? So, from let's say from a Brazilian point of view, Brazil should be proud of how they conducted this G20. But at the same time, from a global South, global majority point of view, was not enough. It just, pledges, how you're going to eradicate poverty and hunger around the world. Is there going to be an inter G20 mechanism for that? No. Who could do that? Would be an alliance of global South, global majority states. And that, by definition, excludes the G20. And on a, I would say, surrealist, Dadaist level, We had two episodes concerning the crash test dummy who's still theoretically in power at the White House until January 20. He shows up at a fake stage in the Amazon rainforest. Instead of being a natural Amazon rainforest setting, no, they had a fake stage with two teleprompters on top of it because he cannot say anything. He has to look at the bloody teleprompter all the time. Pledging to protect the Amazon or save the Amazon, while the people who are actually running the U.S. government, not him, what we call the Biden combo, that famous leak that, in fact, it was a decision that was taken, if not weeks, probably months ago, that allow Ukraine to use attack MS long-range missiles against targets inside the Russian Federation. And everybody with a minimal knowledge of how the attack MS systems work know that their Ukrainians cannot even serve coffee where something is being planned or deliberated. They don't do absolutely nothing. Everything, the big data, the programming, the launching coordinates, the essential digital encrypted information, everything is done by the Americans. So what is this? If we had to do it Hollywood style, like a sound stage in the Amazon rainforest, and okay, sell the plot of your movie with one sentence. The deep state declares war on Russia. That's what it is in practice. We're gonna come to Putin's and Russia's reaction. But first, I wanted to focus on it's not even this discrepancy, is the stratospheric gap between this idiot being in an Amazon soundstage, pledging to save the Amazon, and the people who really run his government let it leak that's it. We're launching a war against Russia. And on the next day, when they had to pose for that beautiful photo with the sugar loaf in the background, about trying to eradicate hunger and poverty, guess who is not in the photo? Crash test dummy again. It could have been a lapsus. He got there's footage that he got lost before the photo, whatever. Or maybe he didn't want to be in the photo, or maybe his handlers. I would say this is the number one explanation. His handlers didn't want him to be in the photo, because this would imply that the United States, the hegemonic superpower, is directly involved in a global campaign to eradicate poverty and hunger, starting with the United States, where more and more people are afflicted by hunger and extreme poverty inside the superpower itself. So obviously, you cannot be in the photo. So these two instances, I think, show to all of us in our audience how absolutely demented is and will continue to be the last few days and weeks of probably the most incompetent and dangerous administration in the history of the United States.
In your opinion, Pepe, right now, what was the main reason of this decision on the part of the Biden administration? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't seem that the Ukrainians would benefit from this decision.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime they have decided to escalate the situation in Ukraine just was losing much more of its territory, manpower, and right now, when you look at Ukraine in terms of their population, the territory they had before this conflict started, it's all gone. And these
Yes.
people who were killed, nobody gonna replace them. And the population is in danger right now, the Ukrainian population. And right now, this decision, this devastating decision on the part of the Biden administration.
Excellent question, Nima. Because let's say there are two vectors for this decision, which this decision was taken quite a while ago. We don't have a definitive timeline, but it's probably weeks and not days. and probably was taken even before they lost the elections to Trump. Uh, the leading Democrats, the people who are actually running the government at the moment, the people who are conducting American foreign policy, including the messengers, the low-life functionaries, Sullivan and Blinken, even though they don't write policy and they don't give orders. This comes from behind, of course, from the donors and from the people who really, really have wealth and power in this bipartisan system. Set a trap for Trump, obviously, and set a trap for Putin. So basically set a trap involving both. In the case of Trump, of course, because Trump would have to abide by this executive order with a fake Biden signature or whatever that is, and continue on a forever wars logic even after he's back in power. Interesting. He already said, I will rescind this order when I come back to power. So this thing is not going to last too long. But horrible part of the whole thing, this thing is lasting from this week until the week of January 20. So we still have 2 months ahead of us where everything can go terribly wrong. Apparently, there was already a Ukrainian attack with some of the attack MS that they have against a military installation in Bryansk. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, they intercepted 5 missiles and another one was damaged, fell and was damaged. And they use S-400s and Pantsir. So this is the latest that we know, a few minutes before we are speaking. So it already started. So obviously this was pre-planned for a long time. We still don't know how many attack MS they still have in Kiev and around it, the range for these attack MS because of different ranges, and if they're going to be supplied by other attack MS from the Americans in the next few days and weeks. But this ball is already rolling, and that makes it really, really, really dangerous. So this is a trap for the Trump administration, and from the point of Russia, some Democrat idiots across the spectrum, and wow, that's a large population. They're already saying that this is going to fortify Ukrainian defenses and give them a better position in the negotiating table. No, it won't. And assuming there is a negotiating table, they won't be at the negotiating table. The negotiating table is going to be the Trump administration on one side and Vladimir Putin and the Russian Security Council on the other side. This is the real negotiating table. Everybody else is an onlooker, an outsider. And the Ukrainians won't say even no, shut up, no. So this is how it works. And considering that Trump, we assume that Trump will fulfill this promise of canceling this, rescinding this order when it comes to power. So the problem is the next 2 months. So we are hostage at what could happen the next 2 months. And obviously the Russian response is going to be cool, calm, calculated, and very measured. I want to read something for all of you by the actual number 2 in the Russian government, Dmitry Medvedev. I like to call him Medvedev unplugged because he says out loud what other members of the Security Council cannot say or don't want to say, and even President Putin doesn't want to say. He says basically that it's not important who made the decision. What does that tell us? That the Russians were expecting such a decision. So there is no surprise in Moscow about it. Especially since there have already been attempts to use attacks against our country with drones. Exactly. The only difference now you have missiles with longer range. It's not much different from attack by drone. It's not so important how many of them, the missiles, the attack MS, the enemy has today. Will have no effect militarily. Absolutely correct. It's not so important, Medvedev says, that with such decisions, the current U.S. administration is deliberately creating such an escalation that Trump team will have to deal with. So the Russians understand that this is a threat not only for Russia, but also for Trump. And then he comes to what is really important, which is what Putin did in the last few hours, the upgrading of the nuclear deterrence doctrine, where the use of alliance missiles in this way can now be qualified as an attack by the bloc countries on Russia, Medvedev's words. And that's what the upgraded nuclear deterrence text stipulates straight on. An attack by a nation that is part of a coalition, or even in the case of Ukraine, informally attached to a coalition of informally part of the coalition, because Ukraine is using NATO material, the only material that they have that is really powerful, will be seen as an attack by the coalition as a whole against Russia. So, in this case, says Medvedev, the right arises to launch a retaliatory strike with weapons of mass destruction on Kiev and main NATO facilities. So this does not say explicitly that Russia will have a retaliatory nuclear, will have nuclear retaliation against it. They will measure, of course, the scale, the danger, what kind of attack was that, if it was out of desperation, if it's in the end, harmless, etc. But if it's something really, really serious, oh yes, expect a nuclear retaliation. And then in Medvedev's words, finalizing his thoughts, and this is already a World War III. So in a sense, this is already World War III, is the lineaments of what could lead to World War III are already on the table. It's the direct threat by the Americans, in fact, not by Ukraine, attacking the Russian Federation, and the Russian response saying, look, any attack that we consider to be against our national interests and against our strategic facilities will be considered an attack by all of you in NATO, and we can retaliate the way we want. So I would say that we are at extremely dangerous preamble of what could become World War III. And it's good to put all these conditionalities in what we're talking about, considering how dangerous the situation is and how there is always an exit door open. But that depends on the Americans. And for the next 2 months, that depends on an absolutely demented administration, literally. Starting from the crash test dummy posing as president to everybody around, to the neocons, sub-neocons, zyocons, crypto-neocons around him. So I would say the next 2 months are probably the most dangerous of our past few decades, in fact.
How did you find the reactions of the European Union and of European countries? Especially, I'm talking about France. I think
Did you see that the French and the British already said, "Oops, no, this and the Americans said, no scalps, no storm shadows, etc. This is only concerning ATAC MS." So this is for the moment, it's an American-Russian problem. It's not a NATO as a whole, including French and British problem.
Yeah.
So what do you expect from the Chihuahuas, Nima? That's it. That's the only thing they do. They don't have agency. They don't have a controlling power, and they cannot make these kind of decisions. And by the way, if they ever did, now the Russian nuclear doctrine knows how to deal with them and already told them, yeah, you're a member of NATO and you want to send a storm shadow against our installations, you will pay the price. Yeah. But once again, Nima and all of you, they still don't listen. And they won't listen, and they will keep trying to provoke Russia into doing something drastic, which is not the way Vladimir Putin runs Russia or the Security Council around him. The elite in Russia is extremely measured and with a Taoist patience, as I like to define it, that it beggars belief because they know what's at stake. They know what could derail in a flash into nuclear war, and they know the consequences. And they know at the same time, they know what it is to defend the Russian motherland, defend their territory against sometimes insurmountable odds, in the case of the Second World War, for instance. So they have practical experience in all these matters.
Are Europeans try to modify their policies in Ukraine considering Donald Trump's position in Ukraine, or they're managing to make some sort of resistance against him as his policies?
Resistance against Trump is already, I was talking to friends in Brussels. Wow, it's the number one theme in Brussels for the past few days is how we're going to resist the Trump threat in every sense. And of course, this applies not only to European Union, European Commission, but also applies to NATO, which actually gives the orders to the European Commission. Toxic von der Leyen, now she's probably losing her sleep. When she's not having wet dreams about Lula, she's probably losing her sleep on that, how to counter the Trump threat. For the moment, there's nothing tangible and practical, apart from what? More sanctions on Russia. And obviously, the people who still have a working brain in Brussels, in the different institutions, they already think about the real threat, which is Europe being squeezed between a trade war between the US and China, and a trade war with a subplot of a trade war between the US and the EU. So this is what the few adults in Brussels are thinking about, because this is real, you know.
But in your opinion, Europe right now is in the position of resisting Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is talking about putting tariffs on Europe at the same time, on China and Europe. It's
Exactly.
so amazing what would happen under Donald Trump. And how about the tariffs that he's talking about to put on Europe? Are they taking these allegations on the part of Donald Trump seriously, or they're thinking that is just part of the rhetoric, was part of the rhetoric of 2024 presidential election?
Once again, Nima, the few working brains in Brussels, they take it serious, but they're very few. 98% of Brussels, all institutions confounded, are ideologues, opportunists, and people who basically want to finish their careers receiving a fat pension. Survivalists, let's put it this way. These people don't even care about policy. So the minimal 1 to 2% that actually worry about these problems and try to have policy about these future problems, they are desperate because they know that Europe will be squeezed. Europe already lost any sort of geopolitical influence anywhere around the world, is losing geoeconomic influence all around the world. This is what one of the points we were discussing in South Africa when I was in South Africa last week in Johannesburg. How Russia there's a number that is fascinating, given by a legal expert based in South Africa. He said that we only 5% of Chinese investments in Africa all over, and this is enormous. It's like 300 billion, even more. I don't remember the exact number. With only 5%, Russia accumulated more soft power and goodwill than China in all these years. Incredible. And this is something that was, I would say, more or less confirmed by the Russian embassy in South Africa. We had a wonderful reception over there, and there were some ultra qualified people, Russians and South Africans especially, talking about geopolitics and geoeconomics. And they were saying how Russia the problem is it's too concentrated, Nima. most of the Russian investments are concentrated in only four nations: South Africa and three more, Algeria, if I remember well, Nigeria and Uganda, if I remember, but more or less along these lines. So that's not enough. They have to expand. But they are seen, for instance, by the alliance of Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and expanding soon, as wow, the big deal, because they are supporting the security of the alliance of the Sahel states. So the possibilities for Russia expanding in several areas in Africa are enormous. Mining, nuclear energy, security services, you name it, energy, you name it. Um, Sorry, where were we? I was trying to answer your question, and I entered into a completely different territory. Basically, Russia and China, the way they see the global south, the Africans understand that they can learn from both Russia and China and profit from the investments by Russia and China in Africa. So for them, the dementia in Otanistan as a whole, in the G7 and Otanistan as a whole, and this American administration is very, very far away, which is a good thing for them. They are in a process in all these different nations in Africa, 55 nations, into almost like a collective development drive. And it's fascinating to be there and to be talking about this and hearing from them. Fascinating. Last week, I learned so much listening to our friends from South Africa, Mali, Senegal, etc. And they were not talking about war. So it's crazy. The minute you step into Otanistan, the only theme in Otanistan is war. It's completely crazy. Paris is being degraded and destroyed in front of our eyes. Outside of my street, you go out and it's social destruction, economic destruction, environmental destruction, urban destruction. And you turn on the media, they only talk about bloody wars. And of course, excusing what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon, and obviously mega Russophobia. You see? And soon, xenophobia. It's slowly deriving towards a xenophobia. And obviously, they don't have a decent, credible policy to try to at least try to get some understanding and agreements with both Russia and China. Can you believe, all of you, our audience, that the batshit crazy Estonian that is bound to be the foreign minister of the European Union, representing nearly 500 million people, she goes on the record not only boasting about her Russophobia, but blaming China. Who the hell is this idiot to blame China in the name, not in her name? Okay, in her name, she can do anything they want. Nobody cares. But in the name of the European Union as a whole, almost 500 million citizens. She's blaming China, and she's already starting demonizing China. This is complete. This is so beyond crazy. And the fact that you don't read that and you won't see that in mainstream media across Europe, this is the icing on the cake in the whole story. They think it's normal. Of course, considering what they have heard from von der Leyen this past few years, and von der Leyen is an intergalactic imbecile. Now the coast is clear for any other minor Chihuahua imbeciles like the new Minister of Foreign Relations of the European Union. It's and Nima, if you allow me just 1 minute, the shock of coming back to Afghanistan from Africa. I spent only 1 week in South Africa. It was not enough. I had to come back because of appointments, commitments. The minute you step here and you said, but this is crazy. This is you see the decline in every angle, vector in front of you. listening, you even feel it in your skin. It's absolutely terrifying. I was talking to friends who live in Vienna. They say it's the same thing. Friends who live in Germany, we exchange emails all the time. They say, you have no idea. Here's much worse. You see? So this is another way to answer to your question. They, in Brussels, when you talk in terms of Europe, in terms of where the decisions are made, and the decisions are all made in Brussels, they have no clue about how the world is moving geopolitically and geoeconomically, and they don't have any policies to safeguard their own interests.
It's amazing to see the picture, Pepe. When you look at Donald Trump putting tariffs on Europe and China,
Yes.
Europe putting sanction on Iran because Iran is helping Russia, and putting sanction on Russia. It's when you look at this policy, it's all about the West's strategy.
Mm.
You don't see China putting tariffs, Russia putting tariffs, or any of these countries. These people who are under the threat of Donald Trump putting sanctions, putting tariffs, tariffs or sanctions, the same thing. You cannot differentiate with the same thing.
It's the same thing.
And they're doing this right now to Iran, to Russia, and in my mind, they don't see the future for Europe, because at the end of the day, we know that this war in Ukraine cannot continue forever.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some sort of, and it seems that Donald Trump would put an end to this conflict, and Europe should see the future with Russia. Without Russia, you cannot imagine the future of Europe without Russia, because Russia is so important in terms of the energy, in terms of the security agreement between Europe and Russia. But it doesn't seem that would be the vision on the part of the European leaders.
No, it's not, because all these people who are in positions of power in the European Union, in the European Commission, in the European Parliament, who control the European Parliament essentially, not to mention NATO, they are rabid ideologues, and they follow a single agenda, a single manual, which is essentially the manual of the donors of the Democratic Party in the US. At the same time, we should have no illusions that this is going to change radically with the Trump administration. Obviously, the Europeans don't know that. The Russians know that, and the Chinese know that, and the Iranians know that. Because Iranophobia, Russophobia, Sinophobia is, I would say, they are vectors of extreme importance all across the Beltway. Washington, Virginia, Maryland, plus the connection to New York and New Jersey financial market. So this is not going to change. It will be a different tone. So let's say, to simplify to the max, a little less Russophobia, a lot less Iranophobia, and out of control Sinophobia. This is what we're going to have starting January. And that will include, of course, the trade wars. In terms of Europe, obviously, Trump and his circle, they dismiss Europe. For them, Europe is so, is like a small rabbit pain in the ass chihuahua, essentially, you know. So they are focused on the big three. It's like when you go to when you go to a safari in Africa, now you want to see the big five. So for Trump and his circle is the big three, which happen to be the three top existential threats to the Americans according to their own exceptionalist drivel, right? So we can expect, among other things, the beginning of a trade war against China. The Chinese are prepared for that. A way to entice Russia to sit on the table and to carve something out of the Ukraine war, but on American terms, which the Russians are already giving signals that no, it's our way or the war continues until we decide to stop. And with Iran is much more dangerous because it involves the very serious possibility of a war against Iran, where the US is going to fight Israel's war for Tel Aviv. This will become a serious possibility from January onwards. So the danger in terms of world stability continues. It just the levers are different and the focuses are different, but nothing much is going to change. So it's very interesting to compare all that to what we've seen these past few weeks, starting with the BRICS summit in Kazan, then the Valdai discussion in Sochi, the APEC meeting in Peru, the G20 in Rio, where the Brazilians at least managed to get something out of it. So when we compare what the BRICS and independent countries and Africa, and for instance, these conversations in Africa last week, which were so important to see how the flame of driving towards a different world is alive in African soil and in one of the key BRICS members, which has a lot of influence over other African nations as well. We can see that this division of the world now is so graphic, and it's going to continue to be as hardcore as these past few years. On one side, an American administration which will basically change a little bit the focus of their hatred and their aggression, but will continue to be inimical to a multipolar world and the BRICS. Don't forget, Trump administration will continue a war against the BRICS in different levels, and in some different levels can be even harsher than the current Democratic Party war against the BRICS. So this is not going to change much. The tone will change. And on the other side, we have all these institutions of multipolarity, led by the BRICS, but including the other ones, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasian Economic Union, a way to solidify the African Union, so the African Union won't be controlled by fifth columnists working for European powers. And we see little details that point to, let's say, a little bit of hope. For instance, the big story at the APEC summit in Lima was not the APEC summit, was King of Peru, Xi Jinping, that arrived, like a mega superstar to inaugurate a port linking the Pacific coast of Peru with Shanghai, the famous from Shanghai to Shanghai. This was the major story all over the world, in fact. And in South America, everybody was fascinated. I read some wonderful stuff. People from Chile, analysts from Chile, they say, "Wow, this is fantastic. Why not us? Why them, Peru?" They were brimming with envy because Peru was chosen by China. So this is an enormous thing. This is the Pacific New Silk Road. It's the Pacific Maritime Silk Road from South America to China. It's enormous, and the repercussions will be gigantic, not only for Peru, but for other South American countries, who want to export using Shanghai. And in the case of Brazil, maybe there will be an impetus in Brazil to finally build roads from Mato Grosso, the Brazilian Central West region, to get to Peru, so it will be excellent for Brazilian exports to go via Shanghai. This is going to take many years, of course, but maybe there will be an impetus out of it. So we see these points of auspicious points here and there. So the big star in Lima was Xi Jinping. The big star in the Rio summit, once again, was again Xi Jinping, because he went there especially to cultivate a very strong business relationship with Brazil. And Brazil is a strategic partner of China in the Americas. So once again, he was the major superstar. BRICS, this alliance, Brazil-China, it's a BRICS alliance, very important. In South Africa, our discussions last week, they were a sort of Russia, Africa, South Africa co-production. Once again, an intra-BRICS relationship. You see, so this is taking place all over the world. We had a few days ago, we had a confirmation that Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam will be BRICS partners. Confirmed, guaranteed. So everything in terms of foreign policy of these three Southeast Asian powerhouses will be coordinated with the top BRICS. So, so, uh, uh, so we are not so depressed by what we hear all the time, 24/7 from NATO stand and G7, etc. There are glimmers of hope everywhere, and we saw this past few days in Africa, in South America, in Southeast Asia. That's the good part of the story.
Yeah. Do you see the power of sanctions diminishing drastically under Donald Trump? Because the way that BRICS is growing right now, how do you see the role of these countries that are joining BRICS and they are willing to join BRICS in terms of just diminishing the power of sanctions?
Well, there will be batches of sanctions, especially against two of the top BRICS, China and Iran. There will be sanctions or tariffs or sanction slash tariffs on the EU. No question about that. But what is Trump going to do about the Southeast Asian powerhouses? Is he going to sanction Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia? That would be counterproductive, totally stupid, because the Americans have, especially in Thailand and Indonesia, they have a lot of economic interests in both. And so they'll be sanctioning their own industries as well and their own multinational companies. Not a very decent idea. So that cannot happen. What will happen, and it will increase, is something that I see as much more serious. Destabilization of the BRICS from the inside. And we can say that the official ideology and the official modus operandi of the Trump administration, including all this absolutely horrid cabinet that he is trying to set up, which maybe the only positive point is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a sort of minister of health. Everybody else is an absolute disaster. Can you imagine Marco Rubio in the State Department? Absolutely disgusting. Sorry, everybody. This is what happens to you when you come from Africa and you land in NATO stand. You know, you should go straight to the hospital.
Take a sip.
Exactly. So we're going to have attempts to destabilize not only some of the top BRICS, attempts to coerce them and pressure them and harass them. That is the case of Saudi Arabia, for instance. Why Saudi Arabia has not decided to be a full member of BRICS? Because they're under extreme pressure by the Americans. And this is not going to change with the Trump administration. On the contrary, the pressure will be even higher now. And coming back to what American think tanks were discussing last year about the swing states, not applied to American elections. These are the top 6 swing states that they identify as we have to go all out and make them switch their camp and be part of our camp. 3 BRICS, Brazil, South Africa, and India. And 3 BRICS partners, if we count Saudi Arabia as a partner, not as a full member. Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and Turkey. So what can we expect to happen within these 6 BRICS partners swing states? Hybrid wars, destabilization attempts, even attempts at color revolution, bribing of comprador elites, you name it. So basically, the Trump administration will try to blow up the BRICS from the inside. So this is the major story for the next 4 years. There's no question about that. And how the BRICS can together, collectively, fight this offensive. This means more organization, more cooperation, more strategic thinking geopolitically and geoeconomically, and in terms of applying policies and developing connectivity corridors and all that, always be aware that, look, the Americans are going to try to do everything to fuck it all up, essentially, to put it mildly, you know. So this is the big story, and of course, in some cases, this could derail and become out of control. For instance, what will be the official policy of the Trump administration vis-a-vis Venezuela? Will they try again to totally destabilize Venezuela? Will they impose another blockade on Venezuela? In Venezuela, serious problem because of, in this case, Brazilian foreign policy stupidity was not admitted as a BRICS partner. So this is Venezuela's position is becoming more and more. It's getting trickier by the day. Cuba now is a BRICS partner, so the BRICS together can help to alleviate all the problems that Cuba faces and sort of protect Cuba from their very dangerous neighbor up north. But this is the big story, Nima. Sanctions, tariffs, for instance, already announced, and I'm sure it's going to happen. Sanctions against anybody who tries to bypass the US dollar. This means sanctions against all the BRICS. Are they going to sanction 23 countries, 22 countries? It's up in the air. But the threats are already there. And because they see not only Trump, and then this goes to the big picture. This goes to the ruling classes of the hegemon. The ruling classes inside the US, in the East Coast, and the Atlanticist ruling classes as well. They see that the disaggregation of the empire as a whole now is so flagrant that it probably, if you ask a kid in the desert in Mali, he already has an idea about it, you know, because now it's obvious for everyone everywhere. And they have absolutely less than zero policies to revert that. You see? So it's once again, it's the real clash of the century. The hegemon, G7, what we call NATO Stan on one side, the US and the vassals in Western Europe, essentially, and the integration of Eurasia with Africa. We can call it Afro-Eurasia, with Latin America as well, Afro-Latin Eurasia, an integration of most of the planet, what we call the global majority. That's the clash of the 21st century. And we don't know which way it's going to go, but I think the battle lines are very clear. It involves the solution of these forever wars, much more than Ukraine, the real war in West Asia, which is in fact much more dangerous long-term than the war in Ukraine, because it's a war of Greater Israel supported by the US against practically the whole of West Asia. That's very, very serious and involves many different nations as well. But we're going to have, I would say, a sample of what could happen depending of what Trump is going to propose to Putin in January on Ukraine. Considering what we have so far on that could be on the table coming from the Americans, it's not even a joke. And the Russians will obviously say, forget it, try again. But okay, we're still waiting. Assuming we survive the next 2 months, Nima.
I think Trump should ask Putin to give him the conditions that they would agree on.
Exactly. Give me your list. Exactly. Not the other way around. Exactly. Yeah. Because in fact, the Russian list is very simple. And it's the same list, between commas, that they were proposing before the SMO in December 2021. Look, Stop with NATO expansion, which is completely absurd and everybody knows it. Let's talk about indivisibility of security for everybody, Europe, post-Soviet space, Russia, rest of Eurasia, etc. And that's it. That's problem solved. And obviously, the Americans and NATO, in fact, the Americans using NATO, they doubled down and said, no, we won a war. And they got their war, which they're losing. And that's from the point of view of a policymaker, there's nothing more stupid than you provoke a war, think you're going to win, and in the end, you lose badly. How can you justify that to anybody?
You mentioned Cuba. I think Cuba is a country that BRICS can show the United States how they can change everything. Cuba is in my opinion, is a country that was devastated, destroyed by the regime of sanctions, more than 60 years under sanctions. And the way that BRICS would be able to change things, everything in Cuba, it's unbelievable. They can just make a huge economic revolution in Cuba if they go in.
Hopefully. I think all of us in the global south, this is what we hope for. Especially all of us who grew up with the way Cuba was being, devastated from the outside by these sanctions and this never-ending blockade, and the Cuban fighting spirit, which inspired people all over the global south. Yeah, in Russia, wow, the amount of soft power of Cuba in Russia is gigantic. In South Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, Cuba, of course, is a model for hundreds of millions of Africans and the new generations as well. This is the meaning of resistance. So Cuba is a model for the whole global majority. So now it's time for the global majority to get their act together to help Cuba. Investments, connectivity projects, help if they need help in agriculture or industrialization, you name it, everything is open.
And let's remember the next Secretary of State of the United States would be Cuban American. He's going to be totally against.
Yeah, but Nima, he's the worst part of this Cuban American inflection. I went a lot to the Cuban American headquarters in Miami in the past, and even during the Obama campaign 2008, I was there. I was visited them a lot. And the problem is that they hate Cuba, as Cuba has chosen to live since the late 50s. And they cannot reconcile themselves that's it. It's their political system, and you have to live with it. You're Cuban. You were born there. How come you don't really love your homeland? And most of them, they don't. They became Americans, and they forgot about the Cuban American, and they become rabid anti-Cuban and anti-global South Americans, which is the case of Rubio. Rubio is pathetic, in fact, and much more dangerous because these people are much more fanatic than born and bred Americans. Terrible. That was one of the worst choices ever. But we can speculate if Trump owes any favors to Rubio or if the pressure of Rubio's backers was gigantic, which probably is the case. Number two is probably the case, And even worse, Nima, Rubio doesn't know anything about foreign policy. Can you imagine Rubio dealing with Central Asia or Southeast Asia or even West Asia? Nothing.
Yeah. In terms of the conflict in the Middle East, Pepe, do you think that Donald Trump recently in his interview, I don't know if you watch it, he said that he's not interested in having a war with Iran, direct war with Iran. The only thing that is of concern for him is the nuclear program of Iran. And considering that he was the one that withdrew from the nuclear JCPOA.
Exactly. He ditched it personally.
how how do you see his team, these people who are going to work with him in his administration? Because they are all pro-Israel, they are all against Iran. Do you think these people would help him in terms of achieving some sort of agreement, nuclear agreement between Iran and the United States, or they're gonna make more problems, more barriers for him?
More problems and more barriers, no question. Trump needs a credible interlocutor to sit down, for instance, with the Iranian foreign ministry, or even get a direct meeting with Ayatollah Khamenei, for instance, and lay out explicitly what would they expect and what kind of deal they could reach. There's nobody in this bunch of idiots that were appointed to cabinet positions by Trump that can do that. Forget it. You have to be an independent mediator or somebody from uh, from the Arab world, maybe, or I don't see any other Iranians that could do that, or maybe an Iranian that is trusted in Washington. The problem there are not many to be the go-between. We don't see that happen, at least for the moment. Maybe, okay, we'll be pleasantly surprised afterward. And the problem is that Trump is completely controlled by ultra powerful Zionist donors. And this is not going to change. So we can foresee problems. No question about that. And two others who could influence Trump's view of Iran are the three top BRICS, apart from Iran: Russia, China, and India. India, which has very good commercial trade relations with Iran, even Modi could come to Trump and say, "Do you want me to be the mediator?" That's not so far fetched. It could happen, much more than Russia and China. So this is what the Trump administration would need: a credible mediator to talk on their behalf with the leadership in Tehran. Otherwise, we're going to have another escalation. It will be very similar to post Iraq, when Rumsfeld was talking about. Remember when Rumsfeld was talking about bombing Iran virtually every week, 2004, 2005, 2006. It could be a replay, much worse, in fact, because now we have Israel completely out of control. So, and that's why the big war, really, for the 21st century is West Asia. It's not the black soil of Novorossiya, which Russia has already won. It's just a matter of how they want to end it and where. So Project Ukraine is practically done. But Project Eretz Israel, oh my God. Then we start talking about real trouble.
I personally don't see any type of war, direct war between Iran and the United States. Maybe I'm optimistic, but
No, you're realist, Dima, because they know that, as you know very well, a ground invasion is impossible. And the retaliation, if they try anything against American interests in the Gulf and everywhere in West Asia, will be devastating. And all the scenarios that the Pentagon did about the war, the US loses badly. So what are they going to do? Bomb Iran everywhere? For what? Because there will be, if they do that, the retaliation will be horrible. And will include Israel, obviously.
yeah,
So there's no way out. War is not a way out for the US vis-a-vis Iran. The problem is, Nima, try to explain this to rational people in the Beltway. You can't, because 99% they are completely ideological and fanatical.
Yeah, the solution for the conflict in the Middle East would be to go directly to pick a war with Iran, with Lebanon, with all of these countries, or just as the Biden administration tried to do, just supporting Israel, sending more weapons, more ammunitions, not capable of putting any sort of pressure on Netanyahu and his administration. How do you see the war in that term? Because the way that Netanyahu is just expanding the conflict right now in the southern part of Lebanon, they're not achieving.
Yeah,
They don't.
no,
It's impossible because the way that Hezbollah is fighting them, and they couldn't capture even a single village in the southern part of Lebanon. This is the reality of the battleground. He changed
exactly.
his defense minister, and here is the solution on the part of the Donald Trump. He's gonna send more weapons, more air defense system, which doesn't work in Houthis, Lebanese. Last night, Lebanon has launched a missile to Israel, hit the target with all those air defense systems, including that.
Including
It
sad.
doesn't,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. You
Mm.
have to find a permanent solution for the conflict in the Middle East. Do you find that Donald Trump's position and his administration capable of putting some sort of pressure on Netanyahu, which the Biden administration wasn't capable of?
No, to answer your question directly, no. Coming back to our last question and answer, because he's totally controlled by the Zionists, including his major donors. So that's it. Who's paying the bills? It's follow the money, follow the money, and obviously his uh, decades long relationship with powerful Zionist donors, businessmen, etc. Same thing. So what are we going to have in the end? Let's see a possible scenario. Gaza completely destroyed. They managed to expel most of the population, and they start building Jewish settlements in Gaza, which is now something literally around the corner. And they destroyed the whole of southern Lebanon for nothing, to become a wasteland like the Roman Empire. For what? For nothing. And once again, this legitimized by the Trump administration, and all the chihuahuas in Europe, of course, they won't say anything as well. Is this a solution for anything? Obviously not. But it's a plausible scenario, which makes it even more dangerous. Okay, a realistic scenario that we were discussing a few minutes ago is okay. Let's have a mediator or a sort of quartet. Remember when the quartet was trying to solve the Middle East? It was a mess with Tony Blair. Okay, try a quartet without an idiot like Tony Blair. Okay, let's start a broader negotiation involving all the major actors in West Asia. This would be an extremely sound diplomatic solution or pre-solution for the whole impasse. You simply don't see this coming from the Trump administration, even if packaging as a deal, a great deal in West Asia. You remember when they sold the world a deal? It was the Abraham Accords. What kind of deal is that? It's a deal to exterminate the Palestinians, essentially. And they sold that as a deal. Do you think that Trump 2.0 is going to come up with something radically different? Forget it. No, no. It's not in their genes. It's not in their brains. It's not in their way of thinking. And considering all the commitments that they made and the pressure that they have, and the people who actually control them, out of the question. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to be so, in this case, nihilistic, but we have to be realists in our profession.
Yeah. But we know that the reality of the Middle East is totally different.
Yes.
You
Yes.
have the summit in Saudi Arabia, you have Turkey just cutting all ties with Israel. And yeah,
Nima, I only believe it when not a single drop of oil from the BTC pipeline reaches Israel. Until then, this is bullshit. Seriously, I was discussing this yesterday. 40% of so Israel's oil is the BTC pipeline.
Yeah.
So this means that the Azerbaijanis have to be on it, the Georgians have to be on it, the Turks have to be on it, and there needs to be an order directly from Erdogan: turn off the tap for everything that goes to Israel, and no cargoes taking BTC oil to Israel. For the moment, we don't have that. So we need to be skeptical.
Yeah. I would have loved if Joe Biden asked Turkey to just cut oil in order to put some sort of
No, because this order, Nima, would come from the Biden Chihuahuas, let's say, the Biden combo, no? And they will never do that. They're all Zionists.
Yeah.
Never.
Muito obrigado, Pepe.
Obrigado a você.
Grande prazer, como sempre.
Você não vai à praia no Rio de Janeiro?
Ainda não. Ainda não.
Ok.
Tenha um bom dia.
Take care. Bom dia. Bye bye.
Obrigado.
Tchau.
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 Tchau.